and welcome. I'm Nick from Beverly Hills Community United Methodist Church. Thank you for joining us for this very special and important time together. As we are all aware, the recent murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and most recently George Floyd have sparked a worldwide reaction around the policies and practices that have led to the systemic racism that continues to run our society. While we recognize that this is by no means a new or isolated issue, the magnitude of the outcry has opened eyes and ears that were otherwise closed before. So what better time than now to speak up and take action? At Beverly Hills, we have a history spanning over 80 years on the front lines of the battle for social justice and human rights. I've even seen articles from the preschool standing for integration in the 60s. Yet we find ourselves here again, another name added to the list of victims of racism and violence. We take our moments of silence, our vigils of remembrance, and our protests of the oppression. We share or repost a quote or a hashtag, but then I always find myself saying, what now? We're told to pray for the victims, act against the oppressors, and love one another so we can live in a better world. It's such a comfortable and familiar place to rest in the praying and loving one another. But what does it mean to take action? What actions can you individually take? And how do we take action as the church body? In the second chapter of James, it says, "Dear friends, do you think you'll get anywhere in this if you learn all the right words but never do anything? Does merely talking about faith indicate that a person really has it? For instance, you come upon an old friend dressed in rags and half starved, and you say, 'Good morning, friend. Be clothed in Christ. Be filled with the Holy Spirit,' and walk off without providing so much as a coat or a cup of soup. Where does that get you? Isn't it obvious that God talk without God acts is outrageous nonsense? To effect change will require actions that take us to an uncomfortable place. Today, let's embrace the uncomfortable space. Let's put God acts with our God talk. To be an ally and advocate of the Black community means to listen to the Black community. Let's listen and learn together. I'm very excited to introduce our guest to you today. I met Natoya a few years ago as we boarded a flight to work side by side in a rural community in Ethiopia. I knew two things about her immediately. The first was that Natoya has a gift for delivering God's message. The second was that she was about to be my close friend, whether she knew it or not. She is a minister, an educator with 10 years of experience teaching in the DC metro area, and a current PhD candidate at Rowan University. Today, she's here to speak with us as an advocate of racial justice. Please welcome my good friend, Natoya D. Coleman. Hey, Natoya.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so honored to be here with you this evening.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I really look forward to all of us getting to learn from what you have to share with us today. So thank you.
And good evening, Beverly. I'm so honored to share with you this evening. I count it a privilege to be in this space, and I am so thankful to God for allowing my path to cross with the Knicks. We had so much fun in Ethiopia, and I too knew immediately after that first laugh that there were many laughs. And thank you, Nick, for this invitation. And I just want to utter a word of prayer before we begin. Father, I thank you so much for this privilege and opportunity to share tonight. And I ask that you would open our minds and our hearts to be ready to receive what it is that you would have us to hear. Some of the things that we hear tonight may be things that we already know, and some things may be things that we're hearing for the first time. But I ask that you would ready our hearts and our spirits to learn, to grow, to act, and to become the children that you've called us to be. In your name we pray, amen. So today I'm going to talk to you, and our talk is going to be titled Pray, Act, Love, the Church's Response to Systemic Racism. And I ground this conversation on 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 25 and 26, which read, "So that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. And before I enter into this conversation, I want to, again, as Nick has already done, say the names of the individuals who recently lost their lives in the last few weeks: Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. Our collective response to these acts of violence were a catalyst to the revolution we are experiencing today. And while we are happy for progress, 3 families are without their loved ones. And so we pause in memory of them. Additionally, I want to thank my parents and mentors and all of those who have gone before me to create space and opportunity for me to stand and share with you tonight. I bring them with me, so they're all in our company together. And I do appreciate the invitation. This is a very unique invitation because you as a church have made a commitment, not just to see, but to take action. And I am so privileged to be a part of that. So before we begin this conversation, I'd like to ask you to think about how you're feeling as we enter this conversation. Which of the following points describe how you feel as we enter into this space? Do you feel like, wow, this is a challenging time, but I don't really need a talk to confirm that? Or are you feeling like you're really happy that the church is doing something because this is needed? Or are you feeling like you wonder if there's something else that's going to happen after this event? And if so, you're feeling like you want to participate in that? Or maybe you're feeling like you're ready to make changes and you're eager to learn this evening. Perhaps maybe you feel like you have ideas of your own and you're ready to jump out there and take action. I ask you these questions because I want to show you how each of us has a part to play in this conversation. And so, if you're feeling like this is a challenging time, but you already know that and you don't need a conversation like this to help you know that, you're at the awareness phase on the period of engagement. If you're happy the church is doing something because this is needed, you're interested. You're at the interest stage of the pyramid of engagement. If you're feeling like you like to participate in future events, you be at participation stage. If you're ready to make changes and eager to learn, then you're at the commitment stage. And if you are ready with ideas and anxious to get out there and take action, you're at the leadership stage. There's space for everyone on this journey. So no matter where you fall on the pyramid of engagement, we need people who are aware and ready to certain of the times that we're living in. We need people who are interested, wanting to learn more. We need folks who are ready to get out and participate. We certainly want people who are committed and eager to the cause, and we definitely need leaders. So no matter where you are, there's room for you in this conversation. And if you're looking to grow, I'm hopeful that today's talk will give you ideas about how you can move to a higher level of engagement as we think about how to involve ourselves in this fight against systemic racism. So our goal for today's talk is we're going to first begin with some definitional work. Then we're going to talk about some common missteps of the church on this journey towards racial justice. Then we're going to talk about some ideas of what we can do now. What can we do to take action as individuals and collectively in our churches? And then finally, we're going to look ahead, look and move forward and think about ways that we can sharpen our tools, add resources to our tool belt, and create spaces for these conversations to continue. So I'd like to begin by thinking about and talking about systemic racism and doing a little bit of definitional work. I'm going to read the definition here, and I encourage you to read along with me. Systemic racism is a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Systemic racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it has been a feature of the social, economic, and political systems in which we all exist. This is a generational issue that we have been charged to address. Systemic racism occurs in 5 major areas in our country. It occurs in the criminal justice system, the education system, the finance system, the media, and in the housing system. If you think about schools, because I'm an educator, so of course, I'm gonna begin with schools. Schools experience systemic racism in very intersecting ways. We can begin with the neighborhoods where schools exist. Schools are funded by property taxes, and neighborhoods and the construction of the neighborhood determines how much funding a school will receive. Seems pretty simple, except for the fact that historically in this nation, we have experienced things like redlining and blockbustering, which impact people who live in particular neighborhoods. Believe it or not, there are actual legislation that impacts housing restrictions that make it difficult for families of color, particularly in the 1960s, to purchase homes in particular neighborhoods. So if neighborhoods are able to manage who lives in their neighborhoods, it impacts the racial distribution of the schools within those communities. And what happened in the 1960s is that families who could qualify to purchase a home were actually moved into metropolitan centers because they were not permitted due to legislation that legalized housing, redlining, and blockbustering to preclude Black families from purchasing homes in suburban areas. So people of color, Black people, moved to metropolitan centers, and this is why we have urban education, schools that are heavily populated by Black and brown people. So if you think about that system is in place to directly impact the education experience of students, because if there are no homes in our neighborhood, the property taxes then cannot fund schools that are in urban centers are not funded, are not as heavily resourced as schools that are in suburban areas. Let's look at the criminal justice system. This has our world turned upside down right now. Inequities within the criminal justice system and stereotyping and unequal punishment for particular laws. We are seeing this in disparate forms right now. Or the media, where there are stereotypes that are being purported about Black families, Black men, people of color, Black women. Those images are projected throughout the media that perpetuate stereotypical attitudes and beliefs that people may have because there's not a diverse perspective, or there's not a diverse representation of people of color within the media, or one that reflects accurately Black culture. And finally, finance. I saw a statistic today that was quite alarming. It said that the average net worth of a white family in 2019 was $140,000, where the average net worth of a Black family in 2019 was just under $15,000. If that doesn't display systemic racism in finance, I couldn't articulate what else would. How many opportunities? Think about a family of 4. How many opportunities with children in a family of 4 from a household with $140,000 net worth be able to experience versus opportunities, extracurricular activities that a family of 4 with a just under $15,000 net worth experience? That's travel, that's athletics, that's so many different things that enrich a child's life that would be missed due to the inequities, the systemic inequities that exist within the financial system. And these are just a few surface level examples to help us see the impacts of systemic racism on our society. Now, as we talk about what's happening in our society, we as a church, as a body of believers, we are in this world, but we are not of this world. We are blessed to be in the kingdom of God. And so while things happen here on earth, we are fortunate to have God who oversees our lives and orchestrates things to make all things work together for our good. And that is the privilege of being in the kingdom of God. However, we are responsible to be in this world and a part of making sure that this world is a fair and just place to live for all people. And so what I've seen, what I've observed as an advocate for racial justice, as an educator, and as a preacher's kid. My father is a preacher. He's been a preacher all of my life. I grew up in church. I sang here. I became an adult. I found my way to church. I've been in church for as long as I can remember. And I've observed quite a few missteps that the church often has as it relates to dealing with issues of racial justice and systemic inequities. One of those missteps is silence. Just the absence of a voice in the conversation. Church, let us not be guilty in our silence. We know by the two recent instances with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, where there were individuals who were there and who did not speak out. And recently, they have been charged with the offense of silence. Church, let us not be found guilty of the offense of silence. Let us raise our voices. I'm getting ahead of myself, but let us raise our voices and speak out. Another misstep is avoiding an immediate response. There is a particular preacher that I admire who made a post recently and apologized for waiting before speaking, waiting for legislation, waiting for a verdict, or waiting for charges, or waiting for evidence to arise and not speaking out. That is a misstep because it is a symptom of privilege. You have the privilege to wait. And so you wait because you're not experiencing the impacts of systemic inequities on a day-to-day basis. Why do we need to wait for a police report? Why do we need to wait for charges to be pressed? Why isn't it enough for one of our brothers and sisters to say, hey, this happened to me? Just their confession of their experience should be enough for us to speak out. Another misstep is employing prayer as an isolated response. Now, I am into prayer, okay? I'm an intercessor. I go in. But prayer alone is not enough. Prayer alone is not the answer in isolation. And we will talk more about what we can do, but I implore you, please don't let your response to systemic racism and racial injustice end on your knees. And finally, another misstep is leaving activism to the activist groups. The activist groups need us. If you look at the pictures, some of you may have been around during the civil rights movement. I wasn't here yet. But if you look at the pictures, you'll see the preachers are walking hand in hand with the NAACP, who are walking hand in hand with the legislators and the lawmakers and the lawyers and the people from various churches. And they were doing this together. So let us not leave activism to the activist groups, but let us lock arms and walk together on our journey towards addressing racial injustice. If you think about the scripture, John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35, it says, Jesus tells us, a new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you also must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And then one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin, tells us, love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle. Love is a war. Love is growing up. This quote speaks uncomfortable situations to me. This quote speaks front line to me. And this quote gives me an image of what the love that Jesus is talking about in John 13 sometimes looks like. It's very comfortable for us to love on our knees, but sometimes love is a battle. Love is a war. Love is growing up. And so what are we growing up to become? What are we growing into? We are growing into advocacy for the abolishment of racism. We are going straight for it. We are not afraid to raise our voices. We are going for racism to be abolished in this nation. Why? Because Angela Davis tells us in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. Non-racist is a very passive way of dealing with things. It is a very hands-off approach. And change doesn't happen when our hands are up and not active. And so, in order to make change, we must transition from being a non-racist to being an anti-racist. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But essentially, an anti-racist is a person who is unabashedly an advocate for racism to be completely abolished. One step at a time, one change at a time in our individual spheres and collectively. And so in doing so and getting active and in educating ourselves, there's a phrase that millennials use nowadays to talk about awareness of racial matters, and that phrase is woke. I'm woke. Nick is woke. A few of you that are watching me are woke. What does it mean to be woke? To be woke means that you are completely aware of the impacts, the existence and the impacts of systemic racism in our society. And not only are you aware, but you're ready to call it out, you're ready to address it, you're ready to respond to it. So people who are woke may be going to rallies, they may be going to marches, they may be writing letters, they may be calling their politicians. They are out here spreading the word, lifting their voice, and getting it done to end systemic racism. But one of the scholars that I really follow and admire said something very powerful on Twitter the other day. She said, performative wokeness is a disingenuous demonstration of an acute awareness of social issues and injustices that affect marginalized populations. And so I want to warn us against performative wokeness, going out and just getting the selfie or wearing the t-shirt and not committing to transformative actions that are going to make waves in our world against systemic racism. In response, instead of performative wokeness, I lean to another one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, who tells us to critically intervene in a way that challenges and changes. That is the appropriate daily response, to advocating for the abolishment of racism. And so what does it look like to critically intervene in ways that change and challenge? Well, I'm asking you to do three things. I'm asking you to reflect, I'm asking you to talk, and I'm asking you to respond. So let's begin with reflect. By reflect, I mean I'm asking you to focus on the inside work. Scripture says in Psalm verse 139, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This social justice work, this racial justice work has to begin with a place of introspection. Even the most woke person has to take a moment and look introspectively, periodically on the journey, and recognize that privilege happens without consent. You're born into a situation. You didn't choose to be born into the situation. But just because you didn't choose the situation, it doesn't mean that you don't have privilege. And so, in order to be an advocate, it is important to really examine the privileges that you have in your life and ask yourself, how am I benefiting from privileges or ideologies that I have adopted or inherited that perpetuate racism? Sometimes when we look at our invisible knapsack, there's an article that I'm recommending that talks about the invisible knapsack. It is a bag that you bring with you that contains all the contents of who you are. Like, for example, I am a Black woman. I'm a daughter of a couple who are married today. So I'm a product of a marriage that is still intact. I was born into a middle-class family. I received a college education, and I have post-secondary education. These are characteristics about me that you wouldn't, some of them you would see when I come into the room, and some of them you would not. They all make up my invisible knapsack, and they all determine how I view the world. If you are a white man, born into a single-parent home, raised in a low-income family, these characteristics about you are put inside of your invisible knapsack that you bring into a situation. And these characteristics determine your level of privilege. And by privilege, I mean advantages that you have in this world that you did not work for, you did not ask for. They are just a part of who you are. And unfortunately, in our society, there are characteristics that automatically determine or deem a person to be privileged or disadvantaged. And for this particular conversation, we are talking about race. So if you are a part of the dominant group, you are privileged. If you are white, you are privileged. If you are a white man, you are the most privileged. And if you are a Black woman, you are the least privileged. I didn't make this up. This is just the way our society is. And this is why we're having this conversation, because we have to be aware of it. And finally, we can't shy away from the hard questions. So now that you've identified your privilege, where do you benefit from them? And what negotiations can you make in your world to create space for these same privileges and advantages to be offered to disadvantaged groups? After you have that time of reflection, I'm asking you to talk and get grounded. Actually name the injustice. Say it. Name racism. Begin talking about it in your family, in your social settings. Let it not just be some illuminating thing that happens in your mind, but actually say it out loud. Teach your children. There are books there are all kinds of resources out there to help you begin having conversation with your children about the existence of systemic racism. Create spaces for intentional dialogue with mono-ethnic, singular ethnic groups, all white people, all Black people, all Latina people, and also create spaces for ethnically diverse groups to have the conversation and name systemic racism as a societal issue and name experiences, explain experiences that are taking place as a white man, as a white woman, as a Black woman, as a biracial, mixed race woman. Have the dialogue. I think a lot of times when we are beginning this conversation, it feels a little taboo to actually have the conversation. I am here in this space to tell you that without the conversation, we won't be able to move ourselves forward. It'll just be a good idea in your head or a statement of conviction in your journal. But just imagine how much of an impact you could make if at that next book club in your neighborhood, you say, I was thinking about something. I watched a talk that my church showed on Facebook and I wanted to ask you what you thought about this, how much more powerful that would be, and how much more of an impact it would be. And speaking of book clubs, start or join a book club that focuses on equity issues. And I'm gonna recommend a few books at the end of the PowerPoint that will create space for you to participate in dialogue and ask questions. And the last thing that I recommend is respond. Get active. Commit to personal growth. Connect with a local advocacy group. Start a caucus and commit to doing the work with others. Evaluate group practices within your church, within your organizations, within your neighborhood communities, at your children's school, that center only the white experience and not the experience and ways of knowing of other cultures. Hold policymakers, law enforcement, other systemic stakeholders accountable for any practices that are a direct result of systemic racism. And most importantly, reject racism, sexism, xenophobia, and all other hateful or intolerant speech, both in person and online. Don't be guilty of silence. Be an upstander and discourage others from engaging in such behavior. You have to put out little fires everywhere. And so as we begin to think about ways to get active, I was torn on where to go with this. Should I provide for you a list of activities, things that you could do or should do, or should I, as an educator, I leaned on the direction of providing a roadmap, a resource for evaluating activities that you're thinking about doing, because I know that every church community has its own flair, its own way of expressing and getting engaged, and I don't want to project that on you. But as ideas are coming, I would like to give you a tool that will help you to think about the level of engagement that you're proposing. And to do this, I want to introduce to you James Banks' approaches to multicultural reform. If you look at this diagram, it helps you to see that certain activities can fall on a particular continuum as it relates to changing an organizational culture and how they engage in multicultural activities, or for specifically today, we're talking about activities that center the experiences of the Black community. And so you might be thinking about an activity such as a special day or a special person like Martin Luther King Day. And you may be thinking that in order to bring the conversation of race in our church, we need to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. That is a wonderful way to bring the conversation. However, that is a lower level of engagement called the contributions level. And it's a lower level of engagement because the content is limited to a specific day or week and doesn't acknowledge the existence and contributions of Black people on a broad sweeping scale. So to minimize the conversation around Black history, Black culture, the contributions of great Black people to just one day is limiting. And so it's at the contribution stage. It doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. It's just something to consider when you're looking at the big picture of how can we deeply engage in this work. Let's just say that you want to have a Black History Month celebration where you're gonna have a whole church focus on Black History Month, or you're gonna do Black History Month, Juneteenth, and I don't know, Malcolm X's birthday. You're gonna just incorporate all of these things. That would be considered diversity additive because you're adding to your general church program the inclusion of important critical dates and celebrations of Black culture. Let's say you want to invite a Black preacher to come and preach at your church monthly or quarterly, or you incorporate elements of diversity into your church programming every month. That will be considered transformational because you're changing your entire church program to include the experiences, the ways of knowing, and the knowledge production of the Black community. And then finally, let's say your church decides to participate in a rally advocating for equity within the criminal justice system, specifically for Black men. That would be considered social action, because you're taking everything that you know, everything you've learned, all that you've discussed, and you're working toward making systemic change as a result of these things. And so I hope that this diagram and this opportunity to look at approaches for multicultural reform will be a template for you as you think about ways to get active. And as you think about increasing in your engagement in this conversation about advocating for the abolishment of racism within our systems in our nation. And so I want to leave you with a set of resources that will support your future learning. I have a litany of articles here: the 1619 Project, America's Racial Contract is Killing Us, White Privilege, there's further reading on that, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and then tips for creating effective white caucus groups, which the title is white caucus groups, but you can do diverse ethnic groups and mono-ethnic groups for a caucus. Caucuses are really great ways of encouraging dialogue. And then I have 3 books: How to Be an Anti-Racist. I brought that term up today, so I didn't want to leave you without further reading on that term. The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And finally, a really beautiful book, The Warmth of Other Suns. And then last but not least, for my millennials and Generation X and Generation Z folks, as well as my almost millennials and folks who are still doing their thing on social media, I have a few social media handles for you that will just be a constant feed of information, things to think about, that you can follow on Instagram and Twitter. So I want to thank you again, Nick, for creating this space for me. I hope that I've given you something to think about and provided a foundation for this conversation that I hope could possibly continue. And feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Thank you, Beverly, for giving me the opportunity to share tonight.
Thank you so much, Natoya. That was great. It was just wonderful information. I did have a few questions for you that hopefully maybe you can help us field as well. The first question was, Stacy asked, was how can I use my privilege to enact change?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question that takes the conversation about privilege that we had earlier to the next level and really to the transformative level. And so I would say that there are spaces where your privilege will allow you to be in a room, will allow you to be in a conversation, will allow you to have access to information. And as opposed to just simply being a consumer of the room, the information, the conversation, take the opportunity to be an advocate. See yourself as a spokesperson, if you will, for the folks who aren't in the room. So what conversations, what opportunities are being afforded in this space where Black people are not being considered? Or what information or structures and systems are being put in place that could perpetuate some sort of systemic inequity? It's very difficult to give a direct answer to that question because I don't have a particular situation. But what I can say is that because of your privilege, you're afforded to opportunities, you're afforded spaces that a person who is disadvantaged because of their race may not be afforded. And so I think the overall call is to not let your advocacy be a hat that you put on and take off, or a scarf that you wrap around your neck only when it's cold outside. But let your advocacy be something that you put on every single day. And every time that you hear something or see something where you because of who you are, they would hear you before they would hear a Black person, take the opportunity to say something. I will say I have been very much impressed by the last 11, 12 days of protests and rallies, and seeing that so many of my white brothers and sisters are out there with signs, protesting on the front lines. I believe that it is a concerted effort that is needed. And I truly believe that the movement is happening at such rapid speeds because we see a representation of not just our Black brothers and sisters, but also our white brothers and sisters using their privilege to say, hey, this has to end. I'll use Michigan as another example. We often hear people talking about the protesters in Michigan who went to the state capitol building with their weapons to protest the actions of the governor for keeping our state on a stay home and stay safe order. They felt like they were being oppressed because they were not allowed to go out as they pleased. And so that same privilege, to see that same privilege now happening on the front line, I think is so very important. The same privilege that we use to push our own agendas, we can use that privilege to advocate for racial justice for our Black brothers and sisters.
Great. You talked about forming a caucus. Tell us more about a caucus and how our church might implement that, or any other church might be able to implement that within our congregation and our community.
So I love the idea of the caucus, and the caucus is really great for that talk, number one, and reflect, number two. A lot of times these conversations are very difficult to have in mixed race groups because there's an element of shame. There's an element of, I feel like I should know this and I'm gonna make myself look crazy because you're gonna judge me that I don't already know what this means. And so mono-ethnic, single race caucus conversations are helpful to allow space for these the beginning conversations to take place where there's no feeling of that someone's going to think differently of you, or that you can work through the privileges that you have, maybe some biases that you may have, maybe some prejudices that you may have, that you can work through that in a space that allows you to be free to express yourself. So the caucus typically are single race conversations. They can be mixed race conversations, but they're most impactful when they're single race conversations that happen sort of like a small group. Most churches have small groups where you bring a topic, you bring a scripture or a book, and you spend time over the course of 8 to 10 weeks talking about that particular topic. The caucus does the same thing, where maybe you take 1 week and you talk about systemic racism, and then you take another week and you talk about microaggressions, and you take another week and you talk about prejudices, stereotypes. And it just gives room to give focus to these issues that are particularly related to systemic racism or racial justice. And you can talk within your racial group to sort out your thoughts and feelings and even create an action plan. And so I think the caucus is really great for churches. One, because it models something that we already do, which is small groups. And two, because we have something in common in that we are all we're a part of the body of believers. So we have that tie that binds us together, and that tie allows us to work through these challenging conversations in a safe space.
Great, thank you. You also mentioned about teaching children about systemic racism. I know I hear a lot that there are a lot of parents that are reluctant to expose their children to these realities. What's your response to that?
I don't think we have really a choice. If we're going to be invested in doing this work in a transformative way, I think it's going to begin with our children knowing and understanding that we live in a world that is blessed with racial diversity, and helping them to understand the importance of valuing and respecting and honoring our brothers and sisters from hues that are different from us. And I think that the longer it takes for us to have the conversation, the more difficult it will be for us to really help our children navigate this space. And so I think the earlier we have the conversation, the better. But I also think that in addition to having conversations with our children, I think that exposing our children to ethnic diversity at a young age is just as important as a complementary to the conversations that we will have, because then the children have a visual image of what it is that we're talking about. And some of these conversations we really may not even have to go into in depth, because children come to us straight from God. So within them is the heart of God that is pretty much unfiltered. And so all we have to do is just guide them in the right direction. And so I don't think we can afford to not have these conversations with our children, but there's so much literature out there, particularly in some of the online resources that I provided, that can help guide conversations with children on these topics. And I think that the sooner we have them, the better.
Yeah, I think that the two points you made there and kind of go together with those last two questions, which is that we as adults sometimes need the caucus atmosphere for because there can be shame associated with these conversations. Yet if we're not willing to have the conversation with the children, then we're just perpetuating that shame that is ingrained in us. And that's the reason that we need that today and we need to change. So I love the approach of starting young and teaching children from the very beginning. So we're just beginning this campaign, which I'm calling Pray, Act, Love. We know that these things go hand in hand to make a difference, but the emphasis right now that I see is on how we can act. We know how to love, we know how to pray, and I think that we need that third piece, that acting piece, we need to perfect that a little bit right now. How would you say that we can continue working together towards the fight for racial justice? What are the actions?
I think that really lies within the character, personality of your church. So I would encourage those actions to be an extension of the work that you already do. And I think that in extending the work that you already do, focusing in on ways to extend that work, particularly to justice for racial justice. So if you're already doing a food pantry giveaway, then finding organizations that cater specifically to providing food for Black families. If you're already visiting prisons, participate in a program that focuses on criminal justice for Black men. So I think that it is just taking, if you think about the multicultural approaches pyramid, it's taking the work that you're doing already and moving it to a social action degree and focusing in specifically on issues of systemic racism that impact the Black community. And I think that there are so many things that can be done. And I think it would be diminishing for me to provide a list of activities, especially because the Pray, Act, Love campaign gives activities for people to do. I think there's 70 of them. So you're getting them. Yeah, so you're getting them every day. So it's just a matter of when you receive these recommendations, trying to incorporate them in a transformative way, not a contributions way, not an additive way, but a transformative way, and even a social action approach, and embedding them into the fabric of your church. So one of my favorite recommendations that I already gave was to have a Black speaker, to think about ways to let the Black voice be heard within your congregation. Is there a Black person on staff? How can we bring a Black person on staff in so that that Black presence can be a part of our community? So just thinking very practically about ways to move ourselves from into a more of a transformational approach.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natoya. I can't thank you enough. I so appreciate your willingness to do this. I know for me personally, you're such an inspiration to me. I don't know if there's any shout outs you want to give as far as, or plugs you want to give, I guess. But following you for me is just always a joy. I'm inspired by all the work that you do professionally and outside of of your profession. That's why you're the first person that I came to ask about this tonight. And I covered that request in a request for references, hoping that you would say yes, that you would just do this for us. So I am so happy that that worked out. And to my church family, I just hope that this is the start of something for us that we can continue on, just a catalyst for us as a church to continue to grow together. And like I said, we have a long history of fighting the social justice battle. And I hope that we find some new things to do through this, and it's something that we can continue to do. Like I said, right now, there are eyes and ears that are open that were not open before. Yes, it took some tragic things to get there, but let's not miss out on this chance to speak up and to speak out and to move together in that. So thank you. Continue to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Like Natoya mentioned, we are doing the list of 75 things that you can do to be an anti-racism ally. Some of them are very simple things that just take a minute. Some of them require a little bit more time and attention. I can tell you for me, posting them every day and going through them step by step has been a deep dive for me, even though I've seen this list before. A lot of the things I realized that I maybe looked at and thought about that I hadn't done, and I'm trying really hard to hold myself accountable to that, to do those things, and I'm learning a lot in the process, and I've already discovered some surprising things that I didn't know before. So I encourage you to follow us with that. We do also have the yard signs that we've been giving out. If you'd like one of those, there is a link on our website to request that. I'm happy to deliver those, or you can pick them up from the church. Just let us know. Just an easy way to let the community know that our church stands with the Black community and the justice that we stand for. And then just continue to stay up to date with everything. We do have that section on our website for Pray, Act, Love. And we're going to continue to just keep pushing forward and doing as much as we can to take social action and be the church that God commanded us to be. So thank you, Natoya.
Thank you so much, Nick. I love you too.
Appreciate you being here.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.